Have you ever worked so hard to build a life of your own, only to realize someone else had already decided it belonged to them? What would you do if the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally turned out to be the very ones dismantling everything you had built? My name is Avery. I am 31 years old. And this is the story of the day I stopped being a daughter and started being the one person I had forgotten to protect myself. From the outside, my life looked exactly the way success is supposed to look. I was a contract litigation analyst at a major financial firm in Seattle, the kind of job that comes with a corner view office, a 6-figure salary, and the quiet, suffocating pressure of never being allowed to fall apart. I had built every inch of that life with my own hands, starting at 19 when I became the financial backbone of a family that never once asked if I was okay carrying the weight. For over a decade, I wore that weight like a second skin. I told myself it was love. I told myself it was duty. But somewhere between the 80-hour work weeks and the hollow feeling that settled into my chest every Sunday night, I stopped being able to tell the difference between devotion and self-destruction. Then came a Monday morning that changed everything. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror in my Seattle apartment and did not recognize the woman staring back at me. Her eyes were tired in a way that sleep could not fix. And in that moment, something quietly broke loose inside me. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and with one trembling finger hovering over the send button, I resigned. No dramatic speech. No slammed doors. Just a calm 2-paragraph email and the terrifying silence that followed. 6 weeks later, I closed on a lakehouse in the forests of Oregon. $545,000, paid entirely from money I had earned, saved, and protected with my own name. For the first 4 days, I did nothing but breathe. No deadlines, no conference calls, no one needing anything from me. Just the sound of wind moving through the Douglas firs and the cold, quiet surface of the lake outside my window. I thought that silence was the beginning of my freedom. I had no idea someone had already made plans to take it from me. The peace I had waited 31 years to find lasted exactly 4 days. On the 4th morning, while I was sitting on the back deck with my coffee, watching the mist lift slowly off the surface of the lake, my phone buzzed against the wooden railing. I looked down at the screen. Diana, my mother. I let it ring twice before I answered, and the moment I heard her voice, I knew the silence was over. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how I was settling in or whether the drive had been exhausting or whether I was finally sleeping through the night. Her voice was flat and certain, the tone of someone who had already made a decision and was simply informing you of it. "We're packing up the last of the boxes," she said. "Richard and I are moving in on Friday." In the background, I could hear my father's silence, the same silence he had offered my entire life, steady and immovable as a wall. Diana continued without pausing. "And if that doesn't work for you, then you can go find yourself somewhere else to stay." She said it about the house I had purchased with every dollar I had ever earned. I stood there holding the phone long after the call ended, the cold Oregon air pressing against my face, and for the first time in my life, I did not feel the urge to call her back and apologize. The old Avery would have already been rehearsing ways to make this easier for everyone. But that version of me had been quietly dying for years, and Diana had just buried her. I walked inside, sat down at my desk, and opened my laptop. Hidden inside a password-protected folder I had never shown anyone was a document I had been building in secret for 4 years. I called it the family account. What I found inside was not grief. It was arithmetic. Over 13 years, the total came to $128,000. It started small, $4,500 for an emergency roof repair that was never completed, $1,200 for a gas bill that was supposedly days from being shut off. But the number that still makes my breath catch is the $27,000 I wired when I was 25 years old. Diana had called me in tears, telling me Richard needed emergency open-heart surgery and their insurance would not cover the deductible. I was working 90 hours a week. I took out a personal loan and drained everything I had without a second thought because I believed I was saving my father's life. 4 months later, I flew home for a surprise visit. There was no surgical scar. Richard looked at me with genuine confusion when I mentioned his recovery. And there, sitting on Diana's dresser, was a Rolex watch $8,500. Tucked beneath it was a receipt for a 12-day Caribbean vacation. When I confronted her, Diana didn't flinch. She looked directly at me and said, "A daughter takes care of her parents. That is what family does. You have everything you need, Avery. Why shouldn't I have something too?" Later that same visit, I overheard a neighbor compliment the watch. Diana smiled and said, "My daughter bought it for me. She had turned my devastation into a trophy she wore on her wrist." $128,000. That was not just money. That was 13 years of my health, my sleep, and the best years of my life. And I was about to discover that number was not even the worst of it. I thought the family ledger was the worst thing I would find that night. I was wrong. After I closed the spreadsheet, something in my litigation-trained mind would not let me rest. A quiet instinct, the kind built from years of reading contracts for hidden traps, told me to keep digging. I pulled up my full credit report and started reading every line. Most of it was familiar. Then I found it buried in a subcategory of closed accounts, a single line that did not belong. A home equity line of credit, $45,000, opened on August 3rd, 2023. Listed under my name. My hands went still on the keyboard, August 2023. I knew exactly where I had been 7 consecutive weeks in Chicago, completing a legal residency placement inside a secured firm, building 6 days a week from early morning until past midnight. I had not set foot in my home state once. I pulled up my old records and found everything: transit charges, hotel invoices, firm emails, time-stamped and dated. An unbroken chain of evidence placing me 1,500 miles away on the day that document was supposedly notarized. But there was my signature, practiced and slightly shaky, on a document I had never touched. The application had been submitted through an online portal. The notary was a woman from Diana's church who apparently asked no questions. Then I found the detail that made everything click. Back in 2021, before a long work assignment, I had asked Diana to hold on to important documents for safekeeping: my social security card, tax filings, identification records. I found the email thread confirming it. She had been holding those documents for 2 years. She had not been keeping them safe. She had been waiting. I did not feel rage. I felt something colder and far more clarifying, the same stillness that settles over a courtroom when the final piece of evidence lands on the table. They were not rushing to move in because they missed me. They were running from the financial wreckage they had built, using my name as the foundation, and my lakehouse was the last place they had left to hide. They had not just taken my money, they had taken my name, my signature, and my financial future while I was working 90 hours a week building a life from nothing. And they had planned it for at least 2 years. I did not call the police that night. I did what I had been trained to do. I built a case. I saved every document into an encrypted folder labeled evidence, then made a decision that would define everything that followed. I was not going to meet Diana's chaos with chaos of my own. During my darkest stretch at the firm, I had studied a psychological approach called the Gray Rock Method, making yourself as emotionally unresponsive as a plain stone on the ground, giving a manipulative person nothing to feed on. That was exactly who I was going to be when they walked through my door. I spent the next several hours preparing 3 white folders, arranged in a neat row at the center of my dining room table. The first contained the full family ledger, $128,000, itemized by date, amount, and the fabricated emergency used to extract each one. The second contained the HELOC documentation, the forged signature, my Chicago transit records, hotel invoices, and firm emails with timestamps proving my location on the day that application was notarized. The third was a formal short-term rental agreement, $3,800 per month, a $7,600 security deposit, and 11 clauses governing noise, alterations, and occupancy. At 11 that night, I sent one email. Subject line, terms and conditions for temporary occupancy. At 2 in the morning, Diana called. I watched her name light up the screen, turned the phone face down, and slept more soundly than I had in years. By 6 the next morning, the messages were already flooding in a photo of a red moving truck, followed by, "I carried you for 9 months. Your father's health is failing and you have a house full of empty rooms. What kind of daughter does this?" Then Richard separately, "Honey, your mother is crying. Can you please not do this to her?" 31 years of silence. And the one time he reached out, it was to hand me the weight of her tears. I set the phone down and poured myself a coffee. At 1 in the afternoon, the red truck rolled into my gravel driveway, silver SUV close behind. Diana stepped out first, her eyes sweeping across the cedar siding and lake view not with warmth, but with the focused appraisal of someone calculating what they had just acquired. She walked through my front door without knocking. Her first words were, "Which room faces the water? I need the one with the most light." I stood in the center of the entryway and did not move. No open arms, no welcome. I simply gestured toward the 3 folders on the table. I opened the first $128,000. Every fabricated crisis accounted for. Diana's expression hardened. Then, I opened the second. I told her about the HELOC, about August 3rd, about Chicago, about the forged signature on a document I had never touched. I watched the color drain from her face in a single wave. The glass in her hand began to tremble. For the first time in 31 years, I watched my mother lose control of a room. Richard stepped quietly toward the doorway. Diana turned to him, her voice a sharp whisper. "Say something," she hissed. Richard looked at me, then looked down at the floor, and shook his head. He did not stand beside her. He did not offer his silence as her shield. I opened the 3rd folder and placed the rental agreement on the table. My voice was level, the same tone I used in depositions. "This is not your home. You are standing on private property as an uninvited guest. You have 2 options on that table, and I will give you 10 minutes to decide." That moment when the man who had been silent my entire life finally refused to take her side told me everything. He had always known. He had simply chosen, every single time, to look the other way. Diana did not argue her way out. She exploded, and then she left. Every step toward the front door landed hard on my hardwood floor, like she was trying to leave a mark. One final attempt to make sure I felt her exit. Richard followed without a word, shoulders curved inward, never looking back. I stood in the doorway and watched the red truck back out of my gravel driveway, watched the silver SUV follow, and watched both of them disappear until the Oregon pines swallowed them completely. And then there was nothing. No engine noise, no voices, just wind through the trees and the deep, undisturbed blue of the lake in the late afternoon light. In the movies, this moment comes with music. In real life, it was just silence, and for the first time, that silence belonged entirely to me. 3 weeks passed. No calls, no texts. I forwarded the HELOC documentation to my attorney that Monday, and the formal process began quietly, exactly the way the best reckonings do. On the first morning after they left, I slept until 9 without once jolting awake. That small, ordinary thing felt like the most radical act of my life. Here is what I know now. Love without respect is not love. It is control wearing a warmer coat. You are allowed to audit your own life, to count every sacrifice, every dollar, every year you gave to someone who never once asked if you were okay. The sunk cost of your past does not obligate you to your future. No is a complete sentence. It needs no justification and no apology. Boundaries are not punishment. They are the architecture of a life you are finally building for yourself. And forgiveness does not have to be a gift you give to the person who hurt you. Sometimes it is simply the moment you stop waiting for them to change. If you are standing at your own send button today, a message, a boundary, a door you are afraid to close, the peace on the other side is real and it is worth it. You do not owe anyone your silence. You are allowed to choose yourself.